Hey there, are you grieving the potential loss of a loved one or feeling overwhelmed with the loss of someone you care about? If so, you're in the right place. Lisa Hartung here, and this podcast is designed to guide you through topics surrounding death and dying. We'll dive into multifaceted aspects of grief, offering you a blend of personal stories, expert insights, and practical advice for your grief journey. May this be a safe space for you to learn, listen, and ask questions about your own life and loved ones. So grab your favorite beverage and let's dive in.
I am so excited to welcome one of a very special person today. Kerry Irish is here with us. I have worked with Kerry over the past 2 years on my grief journey, and I wanted her to come onto the podcast today to share with us her journey of being a psychosocial oncology counselor and kind of how she really feeds into those who are experiencing grief and going through life with a terminal illness. So with that, Kerry, welcome to the podcast. So great to have you here. Thank you so much. And I would love for you to share with our listeners a little bit about yourself and how you got into this special niche of counseling, and then we can dive in.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for inviting me, Lisa. This really is, it really is an honor, and I just appreciate it and just appreciate so much the work that you're doing in the world to support other people through their grief experience. So I have been in the field of psychosocial oncology for a long time now, slightly mortified to say almost 30 years. And I got into it. I always did know that I wanted to be a counselor, but I thought as I was growing up, I thought I wanted to be a guidance counselor and had gone through college and was in graduate school on that path when my maternal grandmother, with whom I was very close, became ill with cancer and died fairly quickly. Because it was a different cancer, was treated very differently back in the early 90s, and people didn't live nearly as long as they can with it these days. But so it was a short and bumpy ride, and our family was helped immeasurably by a very skillful oncology social worker. And through that process, it came alive within me, this interest. And I thought, I think that's what I might be meant to do. And so I switched paths and started school to get my master's in social work, and was really lucky to be hired after that at a cancer center in Bangor, Maine, and then have stayed in the field ever since, alternating working with either in oncology specifically or in hospice.
Wow. And I just think that that's such a heartfelt trajectory, right? When you were on your path thinking, okay, I want to be a guidance counselor, and then something so heartfelt pulled you to doing a work and a lifetime of work in such a meaningful space. I feel like the psychosocial oncology niche is so specialized. How would you say the training is different than a typical counselor? Because this is, you're dealing with many patients who are at the end of their lives.
A great question. Of course, back at the time when I was in graduate school, and I graduated in 1995, there really wasn't specialized training in the graduate school level in psychosocial oncology. So the training really came through experience, through work, and then attending trainings through the Association of Oncology Social Work and the American Psychosocial Oncology Society, and like organizations. nowadays, thankfully, there's, it's a growing field, a growing
Mm,
specialization, and there are a number of graduate school programs across the country that actually offer a specialized track and a certificate in this specialty. So
mhm,
so I suppose that's the difference. But of course, within that training and including the training that I've done over time, um, a lot of time is spent on training counselors how to be with people in who are in existential pain related to
mhm,
facing their mortality or the mortality of somebody that they love, or
mhm,
in facing the loss of somebody that they love, or
mhm,
losses, other types of loss and grief that come along with the presence of a serious illness in a life, even if the person survives.
mhm.
There's a lot of things that are lost along the way. So a
Right.
lot of the training is around developing skills to help people meet those new realities.
Mm-hmm. It's you have such a a loving touch with the work that you do. Um, I've I've worked with a number of counselors over the years, and I just really felt drawn and connected to you because you have this just loving kindness that you met when you're working um, with individuals, and so I'm just so grateful for you know the, your background, your expertise, and then just bringing your whole self to work is it's such a beautiful experience. And so I, uh, many people who are experiencing grief, um, we all experience it differently. And I am a verbal processor. So I knew that I needed a grief counselor through this, through the time of my mom's diagnosis, and then after she passed. And so for anyone that might be listening that is kind of in that situation as well, um, I will tell you counseling is wonderful. And I'm a firm believer of it as it's a wonderful tool to help you kind of process your ideas and move through it. But I was wondering, Kerry, if you could share with us um, what the benefits are, or as you're working with someone, how you can see them grow through the pain.
Uh, um, I think those are great questions. I'm going to try to kind of take them maybe one at a time. You spoke a bit to some of the benefits already, but um, I would add, helping, giving people a place to really honestly give voice to their pain, because so often, you know, we humans, we're often are kind of protecting others and sometimes ourselves from
Yeah.
from the depth of pain that we're in. And
Mhm.
so giving people a space where they can open up and look at it honestly and give voice to it and see that they can actually be with it. I think that's where a lot of the value lies, in recognizing that one can face even a loss that's very devastating, or circumstances that are devastating. And then the other part you said, the other question was about the beauty that I see in clients as they go through this
Yeah.
experience. And yes, I had to say it's inherent in this work. And that's why the work is so fulfilling, is that you're constantly being able to witness people kind of rise to the most challenging occasions, and yet not harden, close down, but sometimes, often become enlarged by those circumstances, as very much I would say as um I've been able to witness with you, and so many other people who go on to use their own, their own circumstances that have been incredibly challenging and painful, and yet out of them, oftentimes there's a desire to be of service to others. There's deepened compassion and empathy for others, and then a stepping forward to say, now how can I make something out of this pain that will be beneficial? I have to say, I see that more often than not,
Oh,
which is really
that's
beautiful.
it's so beautiful because as you were speaking, I was almost like reliving the process in my head and how someone had asked me at work if I could describe the last year in one word or a phrase. And I thought about it and I said, resilience, like when you feel like you have fully broken and you can't go any lower, then you realize how truly incredible the human spirit is, and that the thrive and the drive for life. And I even saw that with my mom we were working with hospice, and in the last week, the specialist had said, I'm really sorry about this. She'll probably pass in a couple of days. And by golly, that woman held on for another 10 days. She was
Yeah,
just
she was a
soaking up
force.
every minute. And it was a pretty good quality of life until the very end, or good enough for the circumstances. So it's just so beautiful to see that resilience. And because you go through such a transformational time in your life, it's really wonderful to hear you say that once you are on the other side of the event or the season, that you see people in turn then sharing their experience with others, especially in the grief community. I think it's so important to chat with and feel others' story, or hear the stories and feel their pain, because we've walked similar paths. And that community is something that sustains us, especially in times of need. So, oh my gosh, yeah, it's just such heavy work, Kerry. I'm always amazed. Sometimes I take on so much emotion of others. So how do you do such meaningful work? And then how are you able to separate that from life and work and still be able to, and maybe you have a different perspective because you're working in it every day, and so it's joyful, or it's beautiful in a very intimate sense, the work that you do. How do you compartmentalize, I guess?
That's a beautiful question and a nice way of putting it. I I would not say that I compartmentalize, but that I feel there's kind of space for all of it. And yes, there is sadness. Of course, there's sadness inherent, because I do grow to love each one of my clients. And so when somebody dies, or when I have a client who loses a very beloved loved one, of course, my heart just aches for that person. But so often I would say that this, despite the sadness, like sort of the sense of being able to be with someone in the fullness of their life, whether that's in the depths of sorrow, or it might be celebrating, the news of a good scan, or the attainment of some hoped for goal. I like being with people in what feels like real relationships and meaningful conversations. That is very fulfilling. And so So I think because it's so fulfilling, it doesn't feel like I'm having to sort of cope.
You really do see such positivity and light through the work, is that you are able, we always talk about those silver linings, and sometimes it's really difficult when you're in such a painful season to find the silver linings. But
Yeah.
when you do, they're great. Like, I was in the hospital with my mom for 3 days over Mother's Day. And at the end, she was like, I am ready to get out. And I was like, well, great. Let's paint your nails so that we can get ready for a girls' beach trip. And so
Yeah.
that's the silver lining, I take away. We had fun at the hospital. We ate
Yeah.
snacks and we painted your nails.
Yeah.
In a hospital room, but
Well, yeah, you were really intentional though, Lisa. I think about making the most out of what was. Like I know you had a long held dream. You and your mom had a dream of going to Paris together. And I wish so much that you both could have had that experience. But when it became clear that you weren't going to be able to have that experience, you brought it to her. You brought Paris to her. And, I mean, I don't know if I'm sort of revealing something about you but I'm going to trust not because you're so open and open-hearted. I don't know if you'd want to say something about that, but I think that was a beautiful example of making the best no matter what the circumstances are. You didn't allow yourself to sort of harden into bitterness or even to dwell too long on having to let go of that dream. You just thought, well, here we are. Let's make the most of this time.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw you do that over and over.
Yeah. It's because we don't move forward if we just get stuck in the frustration of it. And so you've got to iterate and move forward. And so I'm so glad you brought that up, Kerry, because over the past year, my mom's wine club they worked to create a quilt of all of my mother's childhood books that she would read to us. She worked as a literacy teacher for fifth grade and one of her many roles in life. So one of her friends did Linnaeus and Monet's garden, and the friend and my mom and I had come to North Carolina for a girls' beach trip the last year of Mom's life. And we had talked to her about going to Paris. And so she and I are actually going to go and bring Mom this spring.
Oh, that's beautiful. Oh, I'm so happy to hear that.
So she'll get there. I know she'll be with us and show us in some way that she has joined us, but that's the plan. And so it's been this lifelong dream to do it, and she'll be with us in a different way, but at least we'll get her there. So
yeah.
Niagara Falls is also another place she wanted to go. So.
Okay, so are you have a plan to get to Niagara Falls as well?
Niagara's a lot easier than Paris.
Yes.
So that's just such a joy. And you and I had talked a lot over the span of our time together about how, as children, the sandwich generation is really, it's an interesting group, and I'm seeing it more and more where, our baby boomers were the parents, and now millennials are the new parents, right? The second generation. And now we are all having children and raising them. And our parents are now becoming ill. And so there's this whole shift of a role reversal. And I'm sure you see this with individuals that you work with. And how do you see the sandwich generation kind of redefining our perspectives on life and relationships as we are not only caring for our ill elderly parents, but our new little ones? Like, that's such a tough a tough season to be in. And if anyone ever wants to talk about it, I am here for you 100% because, my daughter was born the same week that mom received her diagnosis of a year to live. And she died, right around the day before my daughter's first birthday. So it's something that's really a tough situation. And I'd just love to hear your perspective, Kerry, for when you're working with clients and how do families redefine their roles?
Okay, this is such a good question, and it immediately brings to mind there's a quote which I'm afraid I might botch, but I'll do my best. It's by Francis Weller, who wrote a book called At the Wild Edge of Sorrow, which is a beautiful, beautiful book about grief and loss. And the quote is, "The work of the mature person is to carry grief in one hand and gratitude in the other, and to be stretched large by them." The work of the mature person is to carry grief in one hand and gratitude in the other, and to be stretched large by them. And then he goes on to say, "How much sorrow can I hold? That's how much gratitude I can give."
Ah.
And doesn't that perfectly capture the opportunity that exists for the sandwich generation?
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's so beautiful, Kerry. Thank you for sharing. It's like, that's just, it pinpoints so perfectly. And who was the author again?
Francis Weller. But anyway, I feel like that, that boils it down to the essence.
Mm-hmm.
So it is, it's a time of, I think, when people are entering middle adulthood, it's becoming, they're learning, we learn, it becomes, hey, the whole world is not all about me.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I am one person in, what is it, 7 billion people here. And we start having to, we start having to pay attention to others in a different way and to utilize our lives in a different way. It's not all about, serving our own needs or just having fun. Suddenly we're being called to maybe take care of an ill parent. If we choose and are able to have children, we're having to prioritize their needs first. And so, yeah, we do often get stretched thin, but that it makes us larger. It enlarges our capacity.
Yeah, I just love that that image, right, of holding sorrow and grief in one hand and hope and gratitude in the other. And it's so true. Someone once said, you can't fully love unless you've lost, or when you lose someone and you're so affected, it's because you loved them so deeply. And I think that's such a beautiful kind of mindset, right? That if we didn't have such strong emotions, life would be really boring. And not that we enjoy the sadness or we enjoy the grief, but it makes us real, and it makes us able to then feel the joy. I've talked a lot with people from the grief community who are parents, and many of them have said, I haven't been able to experience such joy after losing my loved one until my own children have, if it's a holiday, seeing the joy and delight in their eyes, in the children's eyes, and how it just brings such a new lease on life, I guess, that out of the sorrow and the pain comes that new life, like a new flower sprouting out of the ground. And that's right, that's the cycle of life. But sometimes when we're in it, it's really hard to, we're focused in on let's just get this person comfortable, and let's make sure that we're caregiving for them. Through that pain comes joy later on. So we are able to fully feel it. And so that brings me to my next question, Kerry, because I'm one of those people that are like, I want to get it done and I want to get it done now. And when mom was diagnosed, I always have the mindset of hope. So there's always hope. And even in working with our hospice counselor, there's always hope. And I think that's something that's so vitally important for people with terminal illness to see, that there is always that hope. But for those that are supporting, and for those that are also living with it, you once very wisely told me that despite wanting to get over, quote unquote, get over the grief, the only way to process it is to actually live through it. And I remember being like, wow, you're brilliant, Kerry. Like, it makes so much sense. But so many of us just want to be done with it. Like, okay, I want to have my crying session. Okay, I'm done with grief for today. But it's not. Like, grief is non-linear. I'll tell you, you could be walking down the street and then see something and it triggers you and you just start crying, or you're driving down the road and you see something, or your kid says something. There's triggers all over. So what coping mechanisms and strategies do you witness or work with clients on to work through their grief toward healing? Because many of us put grief in a box and we pretend it's not there. And so how do you really latch onto the grief, the feeling of grief, and what tools do you suggest for people who are grappling with that?
Great question. Well, I think one is trusting in one's ability to handle great sorrow and pain. And as you said, I think people often, of course, people want to be on the other side of it. Although I will say, I don't think there's really another side of it, as you know. Exactly. It's
different.
Not like something you get over. But you often get to a place where, again, you're stretched large, so you're able to accommodate and live with the grief and have it not eclipse your life in the same way that it does earlier on in the process. Particularly, if you have done the work and faced it and allowed yourself to be with it. So encouraging people to sort of be brave and allow themselves to feel it rather than give into the temptation, which can be great, to dull it, to try to ignore it or suppress it or box it up, because it will still be there. It will.
Yeah.
And and we do see sometimes people that have attempted to do that later on find that the grief is still present and can be kind of wreaking havoc in their lives if it hasn't been attended to skillfully along the way. So part of it is helping people to face it and to process it, to feel the feelings, and to also to employ, healthy coping strategies. And there's nothing magical here. It's the same stuff that helps us, cope with other challenges in life, things like the basics, like getting enough rest, practicing self-care, getting exercise. I do feel like a lot of contemplative strategies, whether they're affiliated with one's, kind of spiritual orientation or religious upbringing or not, can be very valuable in coping with a grief experience. So by contemplative strategies, I mean things like meditation, prayer, yoga, It might also include things like walking in the woods, being in nature, but really having times where one intentionally cultivates quiet and space to be with what is inside.
So
I think.
beautiful, Kerry. Yeah, I'm writing notes because while you say that they're so common, some of us may practice a number of those, and some may have never tried it before. And I think that that's what's so important to, as we're working with the grief community, to allow people to experience these different tools and maybe try it out. And so that's what I've been working on with the Giving Grief Grace community, just trying different things, because we do live with grief and we harbor it in different ways, and we can really see it manifest over time in our bodies. It can be physically challenging for us at times if we've suppressed grief in certain ways. And so I love you sharing all of the contemplative strategies to do. And I think about when I do see people doing them, and or I experience them myself, how rejuvenating it is. Even if we went into the yoga session or the meditation session with 10 things on our to-do list and we're going a mile a minute, when we actually intentionally take that time for ourselves, whether it be 5, 10 minutes or an hour or 2 hours, we come out of it refreshed and renewed. And maybe not all the time, but at least we're not running a mile a minute on the other side of that exercise or that tool. So I love that you are able to kind of walk through that with us, because those are all such helpful mechanisms to living with grief and healing the pain. Someone had said once that grief is like a rock in a jar, and when we are so close to the loss of a loved one, the jar is quite small and the rock is quite large. And then over time, your jar expands and the rock stays the same. It will always be there, kind of grounding us in that feeling of being a human, right? But then we have so much gratitude and light surrounding it.
Oh, yes, I love that. I love that metaphor for it. And you also have brought up and helped to create another really important opportunity for coping with grief, which is finding community and connecting with others. And, it is sometimes when people are in deep pain, for some people, they naturally pull within and might even isolate themselves. But it's really through connecting with others and experiencing love and mutual support. That's such a critical part of the healing experience. Again, just have to say how much I appreciate what you're creating, the community that you've created, and your plans for furthering that. I'm not trying to put in a plug for the Dempsey Center, but at cancer centers and hospice organizations all across the country, and also in many churches and community centers and Ys, like YMCA or YWCA, there are grief support groups, and I feel like those are so valuable. And as you know, a lot of times people will have some hesitation or ambivalence about joining a group because they're already in pain and they're afraid that by witnessing other people's pain, it's going to make it worse. But, but conversely, what people usually find is it's all made more bearable by being in community with others who are going through similar circumstances. So yeah, so I think community is incredibly important. In fact, I'm going to even say, I think more important than, I think because grief is a natural life experience, we're sort of wired to, we're all live long enough and you experience grief. Having a community to go through this natural human experience with, I think sometimes that really helps get people there. And in fact, I would usually encourage people, if they were only going to do one or the other between counseling or a grief support group, I'd say start with the grief support group, see what happens there. And if you feel like you need something additional or different, then explore counseling. So
I
I
love
don't
that.
know.
I'm so grateful that you brought that up, because thinking in our own experience, my mom was in a stage 4 advanced cancer support group, and we called them the VIPers. And she looked forward to that VIP meeting every single week. And she went to it up until the week that she passed. And I joined a young adults under the age of 40 who have lost a parent to cancer group. And it was just so helpful to be in community with people who have walked a similar path, which is why I started the grief group, another grief group myself, because community is everything. And when you look back onto a loved one's illness or a loved one's passing, you didn't get through it on your own. Like, there were doctors, there were specialists that came that helped out. Maybe there was a hospice, there's counseling, there's faith, there's a faith community, there are friends and family that really surround us. And so, at the end of our lives, what are we going to remember? We're going to remember the people that really touched us and that really meant a lot to us. And that's the beauty of life and of relationships. So I agree. Community is so important. But I also will say, having done both, I needed both. And everyone is different,
Absolutely. And I certainly didn't mean to minimize the value of counseling. I think certainly I'm obviously a believer in it, and think that perhaps optimally people are able to utilize both.
How would you say that the work that you do on a daily basis has impacted your overall outlook on life?
Yeah, I think it certainly daily reflect upon that this is all temporary, that life is fleeting. And I don't become depressed by that notion. I think this is just the reality. We will all experience loss. We will all experience death. And we can use that knowledge. And I feel like my intention is to remain in touch with that, so that I can live my life consciously and be in my relationships consciously. And I can't pretend I don't also occasionally waste time on a good Netflix binge, but because
Right.
I do. But I would say that is one of, that's an outgrowth of this work, is that you just become aware. We are not guaranteed a tomorrow. We know that people can be struck with a serious terminal illness at any stage of life. So yeah, what matters is living now, is being present now, is loving the people that we love now, and prioritizing what's important now.
I couldn't agree with you more. In yoga, we always talk about living intentionally, and the only thing permanent is change. And I just think it's so wonderful that you're able to live intentionally, because sometimes we get into the habit of just going about our lives and letting life happen to us. And my husband once told me, if you don't plan your day, someone else will plan it for you. So living intentionally, and that includes Netflix binges and if scrolling on your phone is going to be serving you in that time because you need to put your brain out and stop working for a while, then that's totally fine, right? It's that we have the balance of being intentional and then letting ourselves pause. Oh my gosh, this is so wonderful, Kerry. I feel like I could talk to you forever.
Likewise. Likewise.
So for our listeners who may be experiencing loss, or going through a terminal illness diagnosis of them or a loved one's, what advice might you offer to them, as to maybe just some words of advice would be helpful?
Well, this is a little bit tricky because, of course, each person is so unique and every circumstance is so unique. And also, it's tricky because I'm not really in the business of offering advice. I feel like I'm
That's
more
true.
about, companioning with people and helping them to connect to their own inner wisdom and inner guide.
Mm-hmm.
So let me try to reframe it. Maybe not advice, but just sort of lessons learned over the years from watching things that my clients have done is one thing that people often find very helpful, and I'm imagining this is something that you may have found helpful, is finding a purpose. And I'm not saying within an experience, and remaining connected to one's sense of purpose within difficult circumstances. I do not ascribe to, oh, you got cancer so that you could become a more evolved person, or you got cancer. I would never ascribe to the idea that somebody got cancer or had to go through something difficult as some form of punishment or as a life lesson. I just I don't believe that. And I don't generally see that's a helpful framework to come from. But I would say that people are able, oftentimes when they're first diagnosed with a serious illness and a lot of things in their life suddenly change, oftentimes they might, to some extent, lose some of the roles that they played that gave them a sense of purpose. Like maybe they can no longer work, and work had been something very satisfying for them, and a part of how they kind of defined themselves, whether that's paid work or volunteer work or other activities, being part of say I don't know, maybe being part of a quilting group or something like that, and then not being healthy enough to participate. People really struggle with, and sometimes ask, well, what's my purpose now? I can't do all these things that I used to do. But people can find purpose when they turn to, how can I be? Shifting away from finding purpose through what they do to finding purpose through how they are, and I think oftentimes I have a lot of stories and examples I could give that illustrate this, but one that I've always held really close in my heart is that maybe about 10 or 12 years ago, I had a client that developed a very aggressive form of cancer when she was about 61 years old. And she was somebody that was in like a public servant kind of role. She was very active in both in her work and kind of in her town. She was very civically minded and oriented, and she did a lot of volunteer work. And over a very short period, all of that went away. And initially, she was devastated. I think she struggled more with losing those roles than she did with facing the loss of her life, which she knew was coming. But she made that adjustment pretty quickly and began to really focus on, well, what can I do? How can I continue to be of service in the world? And even though my world has in some ways become much smaller. And so that oftentimes in our sessions, we talk about, how is that happening for you now? And at the end of her life, I was very privileged to be able to go and visit her at the hospice house. And she said, Kerry, I'm still doing it. And I said, oh, well, tell me about it. And she said, well, I've decided that anytime that somebody comes in this room, my purpose is to make sure they go out with a smile on their face. And so
Oh,
she talked about how when an aide would come in to clean the room or change her sheets or something, that she would always engage that person in conversation and make sure to compliment them. And, I think it just meant so much to her to know that she continued to make a difference for people right up until the day she died. So anyway, I probably went off on a tangent.
no, that's so, it's so refreshing to hear that. And I can just, her, aura resonates, right? In that ripple effect, that kindness, that loving kindness, right?
Yes, yes,
Transcends now, even today. So thank you so
yes.
much for sharing that story, and thank you for being with us today. I'm so grateful for you, the work you do, and the time that we've spent together. If listeners are interested in working with you, how can they find you? I can also link it in the show notes.
Sure. Well, certainly, if the listener is impacted by cancer, whether it's their own or that of a loved one, I would encourage them to contact the Dempsey Center, which is just
Mm,
dempseycenter.org. And that, a lot of our services are available to people regardless of where they live. Some services are limited to people, including counseling because of licensure laws.
mm.
Unless somebody happens to be duly licensed in other states, which I happen to be licensed in North Carolina because I used to live there. So we were able to work. Otherwise, most of the counseling services are limited to folks that live in the state of Maine. But people certainly have access to the Cancer Support Community is an amazing organization with chapters all over the country. Cancer Care Inc. There's a lot of other good organizations, and of course, hospices and so forth, where folks can find support. But if people want to find me, they could find me through my work at the Dempsey Center. I also do have a small, limited private practice in which I offer counseling support to individuals. And you're certainly welcome to provide the email address on your website. It's just kirish.cccps@gmail.com. So that would be a way to reach me.
Yes, and I know that you're working on a book soon to be released, so I hope to have you back once that comes out. So
Thank
I'm
you.
Yeah, maybe you could just say a little teaser about what it's about so people can be on the lookout for it.
Oh, thank you. Yes, the it's been a labor of love for a long, long time. It's had a long gestation period, and in fact, now I have invited somebody that's a wonderful teacher in the world of psychosocial oncology, has been a bit of a mentor to me over the years. Very wise woman and very skilled clinician. Her name is Debra Mattison. She works at the University of Michigan. Anyway, I've invited her in to co-author with me, and it looks like we're approaching the finish line here. And so we're hoping the book will be released maybe in summer or fall of 2024. And the focus is really on finding meaning and purpose while living with serious life-limiting illness. And it's geared both towards the person who's ill and also towards their loved ones.
Such meaningful work and a resource that will be truly helpful for the
So
community. So,
I hope
oh,
so.
well, thank you again, Kerry. I'm so grateful for you and the light that you share with us. So I hope that you have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
Well, welcome back, everyone. I am super excited to have Kerry Irish back with us on the podcast. I interviewed Kerry back in December of 2023, and at that time, she was working on a book called Navigating Serious Illness, a pathway for exploring life, love, and legacy. And she has a co author, Debra Mattison, who also wrote the book with her. And they were putting the finishing touches on this book. And I was so excited to read it. Come full circle now in July of 2025. The book is finally published and it's out in the world. And so I wanted to have Kerry back on the podcast to chat about the book. She recently was at the Association of Oncology Social Work's annual conference, brought a box of books, and they sold like hotcakes. So, Kerry, welcome back to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much, Lisa. I'm really excited to talk with you. It's just so good to see you and so good to listen to your podcast episodes and know you're doing this really good work in the world.
Oh, thank you. And, I was saying before we started recording, this book, Kerry, has been such a labor of love for you. You've been in this oncology social work space for years, and your co-author, Debra Mattison, has as well. And so I think that this coming together and creating a resource as helpful for anyone who is grieving or who's a caregiver. So maybe you could just start by saying a little bit of synopsis of the book, and then we can dive in.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the book it's meant to be, a companion to folks that are going through serious illness, not just cancer, but other kinds of serious illness, their own or their loved ones. So we touch upon some of the common challenges and experiences that people have, things like coming up against the loss of the illusion of control and predictability in one's life and dealing with fear, and then also exploring, sources of meaning and purpose,
Mm.
exploring the opportunities for connecting more deeply, for understanding oneself and one's loved ones better through this experience. And then we end the book with a whole section of sort of some practical resources. So yeah, that's a little synopsis. And we incorporate both. We incorporate a lot of stories from clients that we've worked with over the years that we've learned from.
Mm.
People develop a lot of insight through this kind of experience, as you well know, and a lot of hard-won wisdom. So we've incorporated a lot of their stories. We also incorporate a lot of therapeutic prompts that we've both used with individuals and with groups that have resonated and been helpful to people over the years. And we've done that and offered space within the book for people to jot down some of their reflections so that it can be a workbook of sorts.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
And I love that you said it's a companion because that's exactly um, what I felt I needed in going through this process. And so, how wonderful that you have something that you can bring with you and just be a guide, right? Or a helpful support when going through the different emotions and challenges with that. So, thank you so much for creating such a beautiful piece of work and sharing it with the world. I think that you never know the full effect, but there's such a ripple effect of this, and so I'm excited to dive in.
Thank
And
you.
and so you and Deborah describe this book kind of as a pathway, not just through illness, but through love, meaning, and legacy. And so,
Yeah.
um, like, what does legacy mean to you in this context? And, how can someone begin to explore their own legacy while living with a serious illness?
That's a great question. Yeah, what it really means to me and to Deborah and I in this context is um, the love that you leave behind and the
Mm.
impact that you make. It isn't about, it isn't about a material legacy, the leaving of your possessions or your wealth. Yeah, it's about how you live and the memories you create with people, how they think of you. I can't remember who said this, but I remember reading somewhere somebody said you want to focus on you're creating your eulogy qualities versus your resume qualities.
Oh,
So it's more about who you are versus what you do. Although who you are also comes through your acts, right? But generally, it isn't generally through your your work necessarily, your paid work,
yeah.
right?
And I think that that is so interesting. I'm seeing the parallel here of, um, so all of our lives, we think about building our resumes.
Mhm.
And maybe not so much writing our eulogies, although I do have some families that I've worked with that are like, okay, dad's 86, and for his birthday, we're all going to write his, like, take a stab at writing his obituary. But the eulogy piece is so interesting, and also the parallel I was seeing was with hospice, right? So you spend your whole life preventing death, and then once you transition into hospice, it's how do we enrich it and make it the best that it can be. And
Yes.
so, that eulogy is that how can we and really capture the enrichment of this life and make it the
Mm.
best. So I love that take on legacy from your perspective. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
And one thing that's really unique about this book is you incorporate, poetry, meditations, reflective prompts throughout the book, which is, just so heartfelt and magical, I think. So can you speak to the power of, these creative and contemplative tools in how it helps readers and caregivers and individuals who might be ill process their emotions and find kind of clarity in what that is at that point in time?
Yeah, yes, yeah, yeah. Well, I think a lot of times what both Debbie and I have learned through our clinical work with clients and in counseling is that um, sometimes the words don't come easily. It's not always through conversation, but creative outlets often help people to release some of their emotions and gain some clarity and insight about them. So, I've led a number of journaling and writing groups through the years, expressive arts groups, making collage, doing painting, things like that. No, painting and collage, those are not necessarily exercises we offer in this book. There's more journaling, writing, incorporation of poetry and contemplative practices like meditation. Um, but that's, it's helping people find different ways of processing their experiences and their reactions to those experiences. And the contemplative practices, those are a way of kind of stilling the mind, because obviously our minds are always very active, and particularly when going through a challenging and stressful experience, they get really active. um, and so finding ways where we can intentionally create some inner stillness and space helps us, access that inner wisdom that can really help us through trying times.
I think that creative outlet is so important. And sometimes as adults, we don't think about it,
Mhm.
and how therapeutic writing can be. And creating art or just dancing, right? Creative movement.
Yes,
You know,
yes.
any sort of outlet can be super helpful on the journey. So I love
Mhm.
that you've mixed that into the book. And you have spent your career walking alongside people who are, grieving or with a loved one or, themselves are grieving the end of their lives. and you're there for them in their most vulnerable moments. I think that's such an intimate relationship that you have with your clients, which is it's so heartfelt. And what do you think inspired you to capture this lifetime of wisdom into this book, and why now?
Thank you. Well, I feel like together, Debbie and I added up and we realized, okay, together we have more than 70 years of experience in oncology, hospice, and palliative care. And feels like we've accumulated enough experience that it felt like it was time to try to kind of serve a broader audience. And we're both at a stage where we're beginning, we're entering the later stages of our own careers and wanting to wanting to create a legacy of our own, again, to be of service, like that. You probably are familiar with like Eric Erickson's theories of development, and there's a stage of life that usually people are in somewhere in their 50s and 60s and 70s, where it's generativity versus stagnation. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so there's this desire to still be generative, and that continues beyond one's formal work life, of course. Um, so yeah, this was a way of saying, all of these experiences, these stories that we've had the great fortune to be able to hear, they have a purpose beyond that can serve and hopefully be helpful to others.
Mm.
So it felt like time, and I felt like I was hearing, from a number of clients, like, oh, that's a really good question. That really, you ought to think about putting these questions together in some way in a book. And I heard that for a while, and it took a while until I felt brave enough to begin.
Well, I'm so glad that you did, Carrie. I remember even chatting with you when my mom was sick, and how I had wished I had something. And you said, "Well, I am in the process of writing a book about this." And so, it's wonderful that you heard the need and then you answered the call. And what a beautiful legacy that will be for generations of how to move through such a difficult time in someone's life, and have this book be that cherished piece. And it's part of a journaling book too. And so I'm thinking, as we talk about life story, the loved ones will have that even after their person passes. And so that's really beautiful too. The praise for this book speaks to how beautifully, you weave in this clinical insight, right, from years of experience with deep emotional and spiritual truths. And so, how did you and Debbie navigate writing something that's both so practical but also profoundly human? And I think you kind of spoke to it a little earlier, like these are all human experiences that we've heard, right?
Yeah.
And time and time again. So we're almost seeing that recurring theme.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And of course, two, we were drawing on a lot of training. Like, for example, we've both been trained. I'm pretty sure Debbie's also been trained in meaning-centered psychotherapy, which is a training model that was developed at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center and was inspired by the work of Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor, and who went on to write Man's Search for Meaning and
Mm.
developed a form of therapy called logotherapy, which was about helping people who were depressed connect to sources of meaning and purpose in their life. And then that's been sort of expanded and found to be really helpful for people who have advanced cancer, and it easily translates to other kinds of illnesses. So, so there are some theoretical underpinnings to the work, as well as just seeing it play out over and over again, with thousands of people, like sort of what helps them through the darkest of times. That was in our minds as well,
Mm.
of being able to synthesize training in existential psychotherapy and meaning-centered psychotherapy, and kind of incorporating some of that wisdom into this book. And then also just some life experiences. You can't get into your 50s and 60s without being personally impacted, whether it's your own diagnosis or people that you love dearly. So we were able to approach it as well, of knowing we too have walked this road.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so hopefully that's kind of reflected in there as well.
Yeah. And I mean, you're such an established professional in the field. And so I love that you um, bring in that clinical research and the theoretical research of behind grief and processing emotions and finding purpose in life. And I think that's why you're the perfect person to write this book.
Um, well, I don't know about that. Thankfully, there have been a lot of good books written on this topic.
Yes.
Lots
Yeah.
of lots of rich wisdom out there. I want to say too, I just as you're talking about meaning and purpose, I can't help but just reflect back at you, Lisa, how you are have found meaning and purpose through your experience with your mom's illness, and how you're applying that. It doesn't just live inside of you, but you've taken that, the pain and the wisdom and all the love, and here you are putting it out there in the world to serve people. And it's just a beautiful thing to witness. So you are one of those sources of inspiration for me.
Thank you, Carrie. I remember when we were working together, you had said that you see a lot of once someone's loved one does pass, that finding that sense of purpose and how it's amazing what people do in this next chapter of their lives. And so I've always thought about that and said, all right, well, what are we going to do? Like, Mom told me to do great things. So what did that mean? And we put that into perspective. But I have also seen it play out with other friends and colleagues who have walked a similar path. And so thank you for inspiring me to do, to do things after Mom's passing. So it goes both ways. Those listening who may be in the earliest days of either a serious diagnosis, either with of their own or with a loved one, what's a message or gentle beginning, or what type of message or gentle beginning does this book offer them?
Well, I think, part of the message really is about is to kind of encourage that you can do this, that even though it's really hard, because
Mm,
when somebody receives a diagnosis of a serious, potentially incurable, potentially terminal illness, or their loved one does, one of the first thoughts is like, I can't do this. I am so overwhelmed. I cannot do this. And yet that's what you're being called to do. And so it's a way of, this is to kind of help people walk it kind of one step at a time. And it's not like the process is a linear one, as you well know. Uh, but somehow people do find ways to walk it. And many times, not always, but many times people find in retrospect, when they look back, that it was through the hardest times in their lives that they really grew and they deepened. And we're also trying to ask questions that will help people to do that, to use the experiences that they're having to develop more insight, to develop more compassion, to become more of who they essentially are.
Yeah, their true selves. When you said, like, oh, you get the diagnosis or the prognosis and you say, I can't do this, right? That's our initial response. Like, this is too overwhelming. It's the fight or flight. and you're
Yeah.
just going to run from it. And so I love that. It's kind of like a life, you're throwing a life ring out to them so they can help, you
That's a
know,
great metaphor. Yes, that's the hope.
saying like, you're not alone. You can, we're here
Yeah.
to support you, and here's a way to do it. And I think one thing that we were chatting about before we started recording as well is the different chapters in your book. So
Mhm.
someone doesn't necessarily need to read through it cover to cover, but they could,
Yeah.
as we spoke about earlier, grief is non-linear. And so
Yeah.
you're going to be experiencing different things at different times. And so this is a
Yes.
great resource to go, you can go to that specific chapter if you're feeling
Yeah.
fear, right?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And not all of the chapters. I mean, they're kind of we set the book up where the earlier chapters address some of the common kind of more challenging emotions that are very common to this experience, like fear, um, like anticipatory grief, and so forth. And then some of the later chapters are focus on some of the tools and qualities that can be helpful in this experience, and things like attending to relationships. The longest chapter title we have is Living Well Means Loving Well. Loving Well means forgiveness. So we delve into how almost every relationship there are opportunities for forgiveness. There's, and so we delve into that topic. Or another chapter is on gratitude. Another chapter is on spirituality, in a sort of in a very inclusive, broad sense. Another chapter is on kindness. So it's on some of those qualities and experiences that can lend further support, and again, that people can further deepen through going through this type of challenging life experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I will say from a reader, sometimes it's content that is really hard to digest.
Mhm.
But once you do, it's almost like a weight is lifted from your shoulders because you now have a greater insight or perspective into what
Mhm.
you are experiencing. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I've been. Has been my experience. So. But thank you so much, Kerry. And I would say run, don't walk to go get this book. And so I think that this is such a helpful resource for anyone going through, being a caregiver, or if you have a loved one who is experiencing a serious illness or just end of life. This so so helpful to have things to contemplate and kind of a direction on or thinking about how to process your thoughts. So, how can we find the book?
It's available. It's now available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. It can be ordered through one's local library or bookstore. It has an ISBN number. It's easily searchable now. Like now, it's available for pre-order, and then orders will start being fulfilled July 24th.
So
Yeah.
exciting. So, this will air a little bit before then. So, again, the book is Navigating Serious Illness, A Pathway for Exploring Life, Love, and Legacy by Kerry Irish and Debra Mattison. We cannot wait. We'll also link the pre-order in the show notes because this will air before it goes live. But so exciting to get a book hot off the press. So
Oh,
thank you
you.
again, Kerry, for the work that you do in your day-to-day, but also for creating such a wonderful resource to support this community. It's just such a blessing. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it, Lisa.
Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of Giving Grief Grace. If you found the content interesting and think it could help a friend or a loved one, please share it with them. Subscribe to this podcast and get a weekly dose of positivity. And while you're at it, please leave a review. If you enjoyed the show and want to support me financially on my grief journey, I'm raising funds for Project Purple, a nonprofit whose mission is to see a world without pancreatic cancer. I'm doing this by running the New York City Marathon in November 2025, and I'll leave a link to my fundraising page in the show notes. If you've lost a loved one and are looking for support in an online community, consider joining our free private Facebook group, Giving Grief Grace. May you be kind to yourself in the week ahead and give yourself grace. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.